in listen-only mode.
Hello, my name is Dr. Yvonne Unruh. I'm the Director for the Center for Fostering Success. Welcome to the Center for Fostering Success Best Practice Best Fit webinar series. Our mission here is to improve college graduation and career achievement rates among youth and young adults ages 12 to 25 years old who are aging out of the foster care system. We would like to acknowledge our funders, the Kresge Foundation, Havermill Foundation, and WMU for making this webinar series possible. We are excited to bring you this webinar series, which is going to focus on providing helping professionals, students, and supportive adults discovery-driven solutions related to educational attainment for students from foster care. Before we get started, I want to mention to you that a write-up about today's study and a recording of this webinar will be available on the Fostering Success Michigan website following the broadcast. Today, we are very pleased to welcome Dr. Angelique Day, who will be presenting information about a study called An Analysis of Foster Care Placement History and Post-Secondary Graduation Rates, which examines whether students with foster care experience are more likely to drop out of college than other low-income first-generation students who have not been in foster care. We thank you for joining us, and I now turn it over to Carrie Ward, who is our MSW graduate assistant, and will introduce Dr. Day.
Angelique Day is an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at Wayne State University. She graduated from Western Michigan University with a PhD in interdisciplinary health sciences. Her dissertation, entitled An Examination of Post-Secondary Educational Access, Retention, and Success of Foster Care Youth, was awarded the prestigious Dissertation Award in August 2011 by the Section on Child Maltreatment from the American Psychological Association, and the findings were recently published in a top-ranked Children and Youth Science Review journal. Prior to her appointment at Wayne State University, Dr. Day worked as the founder and coordinator of Michigan State University's Foster Youth Alumni Services Program, a college access and retention program for students who have aged out of foster care and are interested in obtaining a post-secondary credential. Dr. Day was also formerly employed with Michigan's Children, a statewide private nonprofit children's advocacy organization, where she provided leadership in developing the agency's child welfare policy agenda. She also led the Youth Policy Leadership Program, an effort that provided opportunities for youth voice, many of whom were in foster care, in the public policy debate. In addition to her work with young people aging out of foster care, Dr. Day has experience working for the Michigan Department of Human Services as a Child Protective Services worker, as well as extensive experience in research and training, including services in tribal communities across the state. Dr. Day's professional experience in research, policy development, child welfare practice, and her personal experiences as a former ward of the court make her uniquely qualified to continue to provide leadership in training, research, and consultation in the field of child welfare. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Angelique Day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
So Angelique, you have control of the mouse, and you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, great. I'm just still waiting for the slide to flip here. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so the focus of my talk today is on the post-secondary education outcomes, because when educational attainment barriers are addressed, other negative social outcomes that impact this population can be eradicated. Okay, hopefully these are, okay, there we go. Okay, more than 26,000 young people have aged out of foster care as of September 2011, according to the APCAR's statistics. And although the percentage of children in foster care have actually decreased across the country, the percentage of those who aged out has actually increased. And we know that foster care youth face great educational disparities. They are half as likely as other students to have graduated from high school within 5 years, and that this low graduation rate could be attributed to the fact that youth living in foster care are less likely to perform at grade level, twice as likely to repeat a grade, and that they change schools often. And that we know that foster youth with limited educational attainment are at very high risk for unemployment, homelessness, incarceration, and dependence on public assistance. So in a review of the literature, it was reported that at age 19, only 18% of foster care alumni are pursuing a 4-year degree versus 62% of their 19-year-old peers. And that progressing beyond the first year of post-secondary education seems to be especially difficult. We know that 24% of freshmen in general who enter a 4-year post-secondary institution for the first time do not return for a second year. So the risk of dropping out is particularly high for low-income first-generation college students. We know that poor academic preparation, limited financial resources, and in some cases a lack of family and peer support mean that low-income first-generation college students are less likely to persist to degree completion, especially during their first year, than peers whose parents attended college. And for foster youth, their outcomes are even bleaker. So at age 25, less than 3% of foster care alumni complete a bachelor's degree or higher versus 24% of their counterparts. And only 26% of foster care alumni who enroll in college have earned a degree or certificate within 6 years of enrollment, compared to 58% of their peers. We know that not completing post-secondary education limits prospects for employment, which we know has significant implications on lifetime earning potential. So, for example, 25 to 34-year-olds who had at least a bachelor's degree earned on average 61% more than those with only a high school diploma or GED. Okay. My slides are flipping slow. So
okay, so I can flip them for you if you just want to pause, and then I'll flip them for you, because I noticed that too.
Okay, so next slide. Okay, great. So reasons for low college graduation rate among this population can be explained in part by the lack of academic preparation among high school graduates. For example, foster care youth are overrepresented at low-performing high schools, and those that are in higher-performing high schools are much less likely to take college preparatory courses than their peers who have similar test scores and grades. So as a result, many students who have been in foster care are required to enroll in non-credit-bearing remedial education courses during their first year in college. And this is important because students who are assigned to remedial education often drop out of those courses and eventually drop out of college, and remedial education delays degree attainment among those who stay enrolled. So, for example, one study found that only 52% of 4-year college students who took remedial courses finished a bachelor's degree within 8 years of college entry, compared with 78% of their non-remedial peers. Next slide. Okay, so there are several reasons why this research is significant. First, there is a gap in higher education achievement for former foster youth, and this concept is only recently being explored. Also, student service personnel at most post-secondary institutions are not prepared to address the unique needs of this population. And it is critical that universities gain this understanding, as they are quickly becoming, in my opinion, the new last placement option for foster care youth as they leave state custody and enter adulthood on their own. And finally, as a society, we've accepted that most young people today will not experience a transition to independent adulthood until their mid-20s or even early 30s. In contrast, less than half of states have allowed foster youth to remain dependent on their government-sponsored caregivers much past their 18th birthday, despite the fact that we have federal policies in place to incentivize states to allow young people to remain in care until they reach the age of 21. Next slide. Next slide.
Yep, I'm having some technical difficulties now. Do you want to try?
All right. It's not flipping for me either, unfortunately.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. All right. Good, good, good. Okay. So this study uses an event history framework to examine whether students at a four-year university who had been in foster care graduate at the same rate as a comparison group of first-generation low-income students. And it also examines whether the relationship between time to graduation and academic standing is the same for former foster youth as for their non-foster care peers. So specifically, this study addresses these two research questions. Do college students who had been in foster care graduate at the same rate as low-income first-generation college students? And two, does any difference in graduation rate between foster care and other low-income first-generation college students vary by their academic standing? So although we know,
Sorry.
no, that's okay. So although we know that foster care youth who attend college are less likely to graduate than other students, prior studies have not controlled for differences in socioeconomic background between former foster youth and their non-foster care peers, and this makes this study important. Because our comparison group includes only students who are both first generation and low income, it is less likely that differences we observe in this study could be accounted for in regards to poverty or socioeconomic background. And then also, despite the fact that there's lots of research that shows that GPA is a strong predictor of persistence, especially among minority students, prior investigations of graduation rates among foster care alumni have not looked at this variable. Okay, next slide. So before I begin, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page in regards to how terms were defined. So first, a low income means an individual whose family's taxable income for the preceding year did not exceed 150% of the poverty level. And this is the federal TRIO definition that most higher education institutions use. And second of all, first generation are students who reported on their FAFSA forms that their parents had not completed any degree beyond a high school diploma. And then as far as GPA, this study uses cut points because students at the university, Michigan State University, where this study took place, are placed on academic probation if their GPA falls below a 2.0 and are formally dismissed if their GPA remains below 2.0 for the following semester. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this study uses a longitudinal cohort design, and we tracked a population of students that attended Michigan State University over a 10-year period. The data was compiled through Michigan State's Office of the Registrar and the Office of Financial Aid using student information system records, and a secondary data analysis was conducted on selected variables that were pulled from this system. The target population for the study was comprised of a final sample of 444 current and former foster care youth who attended Michigan State University between the years 2000 and 2009. The comparison group was pulled through a query in the student information system, and from that data pull, there were a little over 6,000 records that met the eligibility criteria for participation. And from this, a sample of 378 non-foster care first-generation low-income student records from the same time period were selected based on a stratified random sampling method, and that stratification was based on enrollment date. Next slide. Okay. So the use of survival analysis really allows this person period data set to accommodate data where the number of measurement occasions differ across people. So each person in this study had many records as he or she had waves of data in the design. So some participants only had maybe 3 observation periods, where we have one subject in this study who was continuously enrolled at Michigan State for over 21 consecutive semesters. So there's a wide range of data here. So in this study, we had 3 major independent variables of interest: group status, and that stands for whether someone was in foster care or not. So this is a time invariant covariate, which means that you were either in foster care or not. That does not change over time. Additionally, we have gender and race was also included. Those are also varied over time. And then finally, GPA, and this we did take into consideration as a time varying covariate, which means that people's GPAs change over time as they continue through their college trajectory. Okay, so as for the group variable, that was obtained through looking at the FAFSA application. Question number 52 on the application asks if a student was ever a ward of the court. And this particular variable, you can really tease it down to figure out how many students were in foster care on or after age 13, as we have federal requirements that mandate that that question be asked on the FAFSA. So it's become much easier for us to identify foster care youth on a college campus in recent times, which is really exciting. Okay, so for the purpose of this study, those who dropped out once are considered to have dropped out through the end of the observation period. So we're not taking into consideration students who stop out, enroll in and out over the time period. Okay, so the main dependent variable on this study was the percentage of students who graduated from college and the discrete time hazard rate. So the discrete time hazard measures the change in graduation rate over time, or the number of consecutive semesters in which students were enrolled at Michigan State University before they graduated. Okay, and in survival analysis, that event is known as failure time, even when our event of interest is actually positive. In this case, we're measuring graduation. So survival analysis is borrowed from medical professionals and has historically been used in that field. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this discrete time survival analysis was conducted using the software package R 2.12, and this is actually a free downloadable software program, and it was used because SPSS, which is most popularly used in the social sciences, doesn't support this level of analysis. Okay, so the risk of event occurrence in each discrete time period is assessed, again, using hazards. And we use hazards because it's actually the most sensitive tool for describing patterns of event occurrence. And in this case, the hazard is the probability that an individual will experience the event or graduation in a time period or in any given semester, given that he or she didn't experience this event of graduation in any earlier time period. So the event of graduation can only happen once. So the hazard rate will lie between 0 and 1. So the greater the hazard, the greater the risk of graduating. The lower the hazard, the lower the risk of graduating. So I talk a little bit on this slide about censoring. And censoring is a form of missing data problem, which is survival analysis, because we have students entering the study at different times during the observation period. So some students have had more time to experience the event than others. So not everyone in the study will have been enrolled for enough semesters to experience the event of graduation. So some of them will either drop out before they graduate, or they'll still be currently enrolled at the end of our observation period. Okay, so if it is known only that the date of graduation is after some date beyond this observation period, this is called rate censoring, so that's where we get that from. Okay, so the best way to examine the hazard function is to graph the distribution of event occurrences over time, and I'm going to show you those graphs in a moment. So these plots are used to identify especially risky time periods where the event of graduation is most likely to occur. And the shape of the plot will determine whether risk increases or decreases or remains the same over time. So we're going to look at those patterns. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the table here depicts descriptive statistics for the enrollment status of the students at the end of the observation period. So although students who graduated comprised the largest percentage of both groups, former court wards were much less likely to have graduated than their non-foster care peers. So we say that 40% of foster care youth graduated versus 74% of the first-generation low-income students. Conversely, former wards of the court were much more likely to have dropped out. So we can see in this chart that we had 33% of foster care youth in this sample dropped out versus only 18% of the non-foster care comparison group. So with respect to the other factors, females were slightly more likely to have graduated than their male counterparts. And the African American students were less likely to have graduated than their white counterparts or students of other races. And students who maintained good academic standing were much more likely to have graduated than students who had poor academic standing. Next slide. Okay, so here's our first survival curve here. So this figure provides a graphical summary of the estimates of the hazard effect on group status, so looking at foster care youth versus their non-foster care peers during each semester. So in this case, we don't see a significant group effect observed until the 5th semester, when we actually see that the foster care group is experiencing a higher hazard rate or graduation rate than the other population. And seeing this is occurring in semester 5, it's really showing us here that this is likely because foster care youth may be much more likely to be transfer students rather than first-time enrolled college students at this particular institution. And then you'll see that this significant group effect disappears in subsequent semesters and doesn't reappear again until semester 10, at which point the graph is showing you that the comparison group is experiencing a higher hazard or graduation rate, and that continues to see those disparities through semester 16. However, these differences are only statistically significant in semesters 11 and 13. So the population in the sample becomes too small to examine any differences beyond that semester 16. Okay, next graph. All right. So the combined effects of ward of the court status and academic standing are seen in this particular graph. So when we compare the curve plots for the former foster care students who have poor academic standing, so those with GPAs below the 2.0, to the curve for the foster care students who were in good academic standing, those 2.0 and above, show that students who were in good academic standing had a higher graduation rate overall. In other words, being in poor academic standing was associated with lower graduation rate regardless of whether you were a foster youth or not. But when we compare the curve for former foster care students who were in, comparing the curve for former foster care students who were in good academic standing shows that the non-foster care students had a higher graduation rate. And this difference was much larger than the difference among students who were in poor academic standing. The former ward of the court was associated with a lower graduation rate, even among students who were in good academic standing. Next slide. So the results of the survival analysis yielded some very interesting findings. So first, students in the comparison group graduated at a higher rate than those who had experienced foster care. Specifically, the effect was significant during semesters 5, 10, 11, and 13, or the fall semester of a student's 3rd year, and then during the student's 5th year of enrollment. And that these findings are consistent with the results of earlier studies that indicate that foster care alumni fare worse than their non-foster care peers in the area of post-secondary educational attainment. So in this study, gender was not related to graduation. And then similar to findings of other researchers, race certainly had an effect on graduation, with African American students and students from other races graduating at a lower rate than white students. And in this study, students in poor academic standing graduated at a lower rate than students in good academic standings. And obviously this finding is not surprising, in that several researchers have found that course failure is a strong predictor of dropping out of school. Previous research has also demonstrated that grade point average, or GPA, is a strong predictor of student persistence, especially for minority students. However, the results of this study also indicate that the difference in graduation rates between foster care students and their non-foster care peers is greater among those in good academic standing, and that there there are circumstances outside of academic achievement that are impeding their ability to successfully graduate. And I think this is really important to understand. As most of our student support services, we really push, tutoring as the major response to students who are targeted as having trouble on campus, and that, our foster care youth have other issues in addition to or instead of academic achievement that may be impeding their college success. So next slide. Okay. So we should not be assuming that foster care youth who are achieving academically are not in need of support services to ensure that they persist to graduation. So some foster care youth may arrive at college knowing exactly what they want to do to accomplish their goals. Most, however, do need guidance to figure out which courses to take and in what sequence, how to add or drop courses, how to apply for financial aid, and what resources are available to help them adjust to campus life. And even after they have been in college for a while, many students need help knowing how to fulfill their major requirements, file for graduation or transfer, and resolve personal or academic problems that may interfere with their progress. And in our findings, we saw that there were huge differences in a student's third and fifth years of enrollment. So we love first-year programs. Those are really important. But for foster care youth, if they successfully complete their first year, we can't assume that they are not in need of intensive support after that time period. This has certainly been the rationale behind the growing number of programs that provide former foster care youth with a wide array of services and supports that they need to succeed in school and graduate. One explanation for this disparity in dropping out between foster care and other low-income students is that students who come to campus from foster care may not have strong connections to caring adults. And this is a problem because the stress of coursework and the pressures of college life can certainly become unbearable for any student who has no one to turn to in times of stress. Additional supports may be needed for foster care youth on campus to make up or counteract this lack of access to an informal support network. So the findings of this study certainly point to a need to create and or sustain campus-based student support services that target this population. And that the findings from this study and some of my other colleagues in the state of Michigan have led to specific public state appropriations allocated through the legislature to support the development of campus support program initiatives for foster care youth in Michigan. And this has been exciting to see this happen. So in 2012, Michigan legislated approximately $1.8 million to develop 7 campus-based support programs across the state of Michigan. And other states certainly have programs, such as California, which is definitely a state that has taught many of us a lot of really great lessons. But they have funded their programs primarily through foundation funding, and I'm proud to say I'm from a state in Michigan where we have used and prioritized public funds for doing this work. Okay, next slide. Okay, well, every study has limitations, and certainly this one does too. Some limitations of this study include the fact that there exist several other potential confounding variables that were identified in the literature that I was not unable to control for, as they're not variables that would ever be collected and entered into a university-based student data system. So these potential confounders include age at which alumni exited foster care, the years between foster care exit and first enrollment in college, and foster care placement history. So on the education data side, we were not able to identify students who were of transfer status. I probably could have done that. I didn't think to ask for that, and certainly we saw that playing out in the survival curves. And that transfer students were very likely to have graduated in less than 8 semesters from the university under examination in this study. Transfer students, we also know, have very different college experiences than students who enroll in a 4-year college immediately or shortly after high school. Secondly, we know that test scores on college entrance exams and high school GPA are significant predictors of college GPA. And other studies have found that students with higher test scores and grades have demonstrated that higher ability prior to entering college and therefore tend to perform better in college as well. And that students that enter a college or university in the bottom half of test score distribution are more likely to suffer in terms of GPA, both in their first year and through their senior year in college. So another factor that could have affected the foster care group's graduation rate is the loss of access to the education and training voucher after they turn 23 years of age. So the inclusion of age as a covariate would have allowed us to assess how many students became ineligible for ETV at the time they dropped out of college. So many studies lead to more questions. So on that note, do we have questions?
Yeah, one clarification question, Angelique. On the semesters, on the survival graphs you have going out to 20 semesters, are you including fall, spring, and summer sessions, or is there a way to sort of compute those into years of education? So would 10 semesters be 5 years at state, for example?
So at Michigan State, they use a 3-semester program. So we have summer 1 and summer 2 at MSU, but it's calculated as just being enrolled in the summer. So each person was only eligible to be enrolled for 3 semesters per year.
Okay.
It's also important to understand that if a student was not enrolled over a summer term, they were not calculated as dropping out. They were only calculated as dropping out if they were not enrolled during a fall or spring term.
Okay. So when you're looking at 10 semesters, that really is looking at just about 3 years of enrollment on the 3 semesters. Okay. We do have, let's see, a question here. Okay. Were there any findings or do you have thoughts about why those particular semesters are statistically harder, 5, 10, 11, 13? Do you understand that question? This is what I'm reading. So,
well, I'll try my best.
There's a second
to
part.
answer that. I think. Okay.
Also,
I think
how many semesters per year is that based on?
How many semesters per year is that based on? Well, I think I'm assuming that's your original question, that it was each student could have up to 3 semesters a year in this data set.
I was asking you the question earlier, and now I'm reading a question by someone else. So, so if somebody else out there wants to clarify that, go ahead. But otherwise, I think just if you could go ahead with the question about why you think the semesters 5, 10, 11, 13 are statistically harder is the question.
Well, like I said, traditionally we have really poured a lot of our higher ed monies into the first year experience. So many universities have extra supports for students in their first year. So when you're talking about semester 5, we're talking about the end of a second year, okay? So this is a time period when students may not have access to the same levels of supports because we, in higher ed in general, don't invest as much in our student support services after the first year experience. So I think we could be seeing playing out here that reduction of intensive supports in this population, and that we can see that it's having an immediate impact, that when supports are reduced, that students struggle.
Another question, do you know if it made any difference in the student's major or discipline in terms of the graduation rates?
I didn't put that in the model, however, I did collect that variable. Students' majors were all over the map. There was actually no one specific major that students were involved in.
Okay. Another question is, just wanting to make sure that I'm understanding the analysis correctly. It says a failure event is graduation, while students who dropped out or who had not graduated by the end of the observation period are censored. Do I have this right? And it goes on to say, so stop outs For example, students who dropped out for a semester but then later went on to earn the degree are not counted as having graduated in the analysis. The two-part question.
Okay. Yep. I remember the second part, so let me do that first. Stopping out, students who dropped out and then may have re-enrolled, they were, for the point of this particular analysis, they were counted as dropping out for the whole time. So once they dropped out the first time, we did not put them back in the study if they re-enrolled in subsequent semester after dropping out. So that is a wonderful topic that needs to be studied. I think the idea of stopping out with this population is an interesting idea, and it certainly would warrant subsequent analysis around students who have that pattern of college going.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first half of the question, I apologize, I've forgotten it already.
It was just, it's clarifying that the failure event is graduation.
Oh, yes, that is absolutely, and I know it's confusing to think about a positive event as being considered a failure variable, and really the idea of failure is a medical term because the concept of survival analysis was first coined by medical practitioners that were tracking people with terminal illnesses. So, medical professionals use the term failure because they're looking at time to death oftentimes. And but our event that we care about is graduation, which is a positive. So in this case, yes, our failure variable is in fact a positive variable, which is graduation.
Okay. And then how is dropout defined? Is it simply that a student was not enrolled for a semester?
Right. If a student was enrolled and then they were not enrolled in either the fall or the spring term, then they were categorized as dropping out. If we didn't see them enrolled in the summer term, we did not count them as dropping out.
Okay. Another question here is, did you have information on full-time versus part-time enrollment status, the number of credits attempted for each semester, so those two? Full-time, part-time, and number of credits.
Mm-hmm. For the students at Michigan State, the vast majority were indeed full-time, but I did not ask or think to ask about the exact number of credits enrolled. So certainly a student who is plugging along at 12 credits a semester, which is the minimum number you need to be identified as full-time status, their experience or time to graduation may look very different than students who were taking maybe 20 credits a semester. So that is definitely a variable that could play into time to graduation that should be looked at in the future.
Okay, and this next question is going to be a little bit of an explanation. For the time-varying foster care status, I'm assuming this is based on FAFSA disclosure. If so, I'm a little confused about the time-varying part of the foster care status. Aren't the FAFSA questions retrospective, and don't they include current foster care status?
The FAFSA form does not ask if you're currently in the foster care system. It simply asks, were you in foster care on or after your 13th birthday? So a student was counted as being a foster care youth if they were in care on or after their 13th birthday. So it had nothing to do of whether they were currently in care and then at some point in time in the study they were exited foster care. So we counted them all as foster care if they checked yes to the box of if they were in care 13 and older. And this study was conducted prior to Michigan's adoption of the extension policy to age 21. So I think replicating this study, looking at students who are enrolled in college with that active foster care status versus the former would again be another very interesting study for future analysis.
Okay. Thank you for presenting the research. I'm wondering, with all of the folks that are out there that are working as supports for students from foster care who are on our college campuses in Michigan and elsewhere, what are your thoughts about sort of like boots on the ground guidance that your study can offer them in terms of what they could advocate for, or how they could orient their support services to better fit the needs of the students.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly think that this study debunks the theory that poverty is attributed to dropout rates, and that there's obviously something more going on than poverty that is predicting academic issues. I think the second major finding of this study is the fact that foster care youth who had good academic standing were still dropping out. So focusing our student support services solely on tutoring or academic achievement is not the answer to increasing college graduation rates for foster care populations. And that looking at supports using a wraparound model that looks at comprehensively academic achievement coupled with financial aid, coupled with housing, the ability of students to have a go-to person on campus to assist with or go over potential emergency things that come about that students don't plan for, such as car problems or transportation in getting to class or child care issues. And that all of these things play into the success or failure of college students, and that we just can't assume that if a foster care youth makes it to college that they have everything they need to be successful, and that college enrollment is only the first part of the college journey, and that universities need to be asking the question when they have foster youth on their campus of, do they have an informal support network? And if they don't, what are we doing as a college to help build that for students to ensure that once we accept them on our campus, that we keep them there?
Okay, thank you. There are no more questions. All right, well, we can wait a minute to see if there are any others coming in. Do you have any last words, Angelique, that you'd like to say?
I'm excited to be part of this work, and I'm enthusiastic by the number listened and are making this a priority on their college campuses. And I would love to see a study like this redone, focusing on community colleges and what kinds of things are happening in the community college world. I think this is exciting, and I will be ecstatic to see kind of what other researchers around the country are looking at and how we can work collectively to change these outcomes for this population.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Day, for the presentation today in our Best Practice, Best Fit webinar series. Thank you all for attending. If you would like more information about the webinar series, please visit our website at www.fosteringsuccessmichigan.com. And if any listeners have an idea for a research study that they're interested in presenting via this series, they can contact me directly. My email is up on the screen. Just send me a note with the study that you have interest in, and we can see about working you into the schedule. Thanks so much, everyone, and wishing you all a wonderful afternoon.